Hey everybody, welcome back. We're reading Copper's Son by Sharon Draper. That's another quick chapter. Let me see. We are now on chapter 12. Welcome to Sullivan's Island. As you can see, we're almost done with part one from Amari's perspective. But we're moving on to chapter 12. Welcome to Sullivan's Island. Kaboom! The ship's cannon fired suddenly, sending the slave women on deck scurrying for cover. Amari cowered close to Afi, sure that her life was about to end. The sailors, however, seemed unconcerned, even cheerful, as they steered the ship towards its destination. Some of them whistled, a sound that Amari found to be particularly distasteful. She peeked over the edge of the ship, and suddenly, green and golden beyond the blue of the sea, the land appeared from the distant mists. Amari had no idea what to imagine, but the land she saw was surprisingly beautiful, with lush green trees growing quite close to a long sandy beach.
Afi, she whispered, the land is lovely. I thought it must surely be an ugly place. Yes, it is beautiful to look at. Remember that when the ugliness overtakes you, Afi told her. Find beauty wherever you can, child. It will keep you alive. I could not have survived without you, Afi, Amari told her, giving the older woman a clumsy hug. You have been a gift to me as well, Amari. I'm glad we were together for this horrible journey. What happens now? Amari asked. Afi had no time to answer, for a small boat came up close to the ship and a balding white man climbed on board. He wore a cloth tied across his face. The captain of their ship laughed and welcomed him aboard. The first thing Amari noticed was that the newcomer was clean, smelling strongly of the scent of too many flowers. He coughed and choked as if the very air of the slave ship would infect him with illness. It was clear he was reacting to a terrible odor. Amari could make out only a few of the words between them. She could figure out the words stink and slave and cargo, and that the man who had come on board was some sort of official from the land they were heading toward. Amari realized as she listened intently to their conversation that she and her fellow slaves were the cargo. Then she saw the captain hand something to the man. It was a small leather pouch that bulged with silver objects. The man took it greedily and stuffed it into his shirt. The captain then laughed again and pointed to Afi and Amari and the other women on the deck. The man walked over to the slave women and rubbed his hands together. With a look that seemed to Amari to combine disgust as well as desire, he proceeded to examine each of the women slaves very carefully. Afi was called first. Like the rest of the women, she was just about naked. He checked every bone and muscle of her body by running his hands over her, noting flaws or bruises. Afi's back showed many scars, and he frowned with displeasure. He looked inside her mouth and checked her teeth. He checked her genitals. She kept her eyes closed. Amari knew that Afi's mind was in another place. "Good breeder," he heard the man say as he smacked Afi on the buttocks. Amari did not know what that meant. Afi was sent back to her place on the deck, and Amari was called next. Using Afi's strength as an example, Amari stood quietly as she was touched and examined and fondled. Her impulse was to jerk away from him, but she forced herself to stand silently. The rest of the women were checked next. Then the men, who had been brought up on deck, were examined as well. The man scribbled some marks on a flat sheet he carried and gave it to the captain. Amari listened carefully to his words. Even though she did not fully understand their meaning, she knew that her life was about to change again. "Your cargo is approved to land, Captain. Welcome to Sullivan's Island." And that ends chapter 12. Again, pretty short chapter, getting them to land on the Carolinas, and just again going through another humiliating experience with the guy, filling her up, basically checking her out. He did that with all the women. Now, one thing I do want you to keep in mind, and this is again just kind of learning about the culture here that African Americans, come from. Sometimes is earlier, not as much now, but years and years ago, there would probably be stereotypical rumors about how certain minorities stink, and some of that would be the Africans, like how Africans stink or black people stink. And again, this is something that was started in slave times, particularly from this ship. So as you can see,
And this would be any human being. If you were laying in filth for weeks and weeks and weeks or months at a time, you know, say you're gonna be stinking. That's just logic. In this case, this guy who's never on the ship comes on, he smells the filth and just humans who've been, you know, not taken care of, coming to land. Now he's like, oh, it stinks here. He's probably talking about slaves stinking, and slaves stink, and these black people stink. So if you ever hear that stereotype or have heard anyone older saying that, or you watch movies later on and they say something about how you know, certain minorities stink, particularly African Americans or blacks, it came from things like this. Those things like this would stick, even when they stopped doing slave runs and the slave trade. But the language and the perceptions that people had during the slave times started to stick to Africans and later on African Americans, where these stereotypes or these perceptions of them lingered and lasted and became like negative, which this is negative already, but it will continue to be negative, where you already have a perception or idea that this person, these black people specifically, stink, you know. And this maybe 200-300 years later, and because they've been saying it for that amount of time, now every time you see a black person, oh, they stink, they don't smell as good as we do. And that all of that comes back to the slave trade and things that happened there. So just again, you'll notice that like a lot of stuff, and I'll always try to point it out as best I can. Again, if there's more someone wants to add to it, or if I make a mistake, please feel free to rectify me. Or if this is in the class, you know, the teacher wants to expound, or if I made a mistake, let me know, or not let me know, but I'll let your students know. But I'll try to point that stuff out, because a lot of stuff that happened with African Americans, a lot of stuff started during slavery and slave time. So. But we're finishing up this chapter, really short chapter. We are moving on to the last chapter of part 1 from Amari's perspective. So next time you come, we'll be finishing up this chapter. So thanks for reading along with me. I appreciate you. You guys have a good one. I'll see you on the next video.